She cannot love you like I do. The words escaped before Victoria Sterling could stop them, hanging in the quiet elevator like a confession neither of them had been prepared to hear. Ethan Brooks stood motionless, one hand resting on the strap of his worn leather messenger bag, the other holding a small paper sack filled with fresh blueberry muffins for his 8-year-old daughter. He had stepped into the elevator, expecting another ordinary Monday morning inside Sterling Heights, the elegant apartment building he had called home for the past 3 years. Instead, the few seconds between the lobby and the 18th floor had changed everything. Victoria lowered her eyes for the first time since Ethan had known her. Usually she carried herself with calm confidence, always greeting residents with a warm smile that never revealed too much. Today her composure had vanished. Ethan searched her face, unsure whether he had misunderstood what he had just heard. "Victoria?" he asked quietly. She took a slow breath, trying to gather the dignity that had abandoned her only moments before. "I am sorry," she whispered. "You were telling me about your dinner plans, and I should not have said that." Ethan blinked in confusion. Just seconds earlier, he had smiled politely and mentioned that a friend from Lily's elementary school had introduced him to someone named Rachel. It would be his first dinner date since losing his wife nearly 6 years ago. He had not spoken about it with excitement. He had simply mentioned it the way neighbors often shared small pieces of everyday life. Somehow, that ordinary conversation had uncovered something extraordinary. The elevator continued climbing in complete silence. Soft instrumental music floated through hidden speakers, while polished brass walls reflected two people suddenly standing much farther apart than the few feet between them. Ethan had always admired Victoria. She was thoughtful, intelligent, and surprisingly kind for someone who carried herself with such quiet elegance. She remembered residents' birthdays, asked about Lily's piano lessons, and somehow never forgot anyone's favorite bakery or morning coffee. To Ethan, she had simply been the gracious woman who lived in the penthouse and seemed to know everyone without asking for attention. He had never imagined there could be anything more behind her gentle smile. When the elevator doors opened onto the 18th floor, neither of them moved immediately. Ethan finally spoke with the same calm sincerity that had guided him through every difficult season of his life. "Did you mean what you said?" Victoria closed her eyes for a brief moment before answering honestly. "More than I ever wanted you to know." Those words settled deep inside Ethan's heart, not because they made sense, but because they did not. He looked at the woman standing before him and realized he knew almost nothing about her beyond the polite conversations they had shared over the years. Before he could ask another question, the sound of children laughing drifted from the hallway as several neighbors stepped out of another elevator. Victoria straightened her jacket and quietly smiled again, carefully rebuilding the graceful composure the world expected from her. "Please forget what happened," she said softly. "It was unfair to place that burden on you." Ethan watched her walk away, every confident step hiding emotions she had protected for years. The apartment hallway suddenly felt unfamiliar, as though the building itself had quietly changed around him. When he finally unlocked his door, Lily looked up from the dining table, where she was coloring a picture of 3 people holding hands beneath a bright blue sky. "Daddy," she asked with innocent curiosity, "why do you look like someone just told you the biggest secret in the world?" Ethan smiled gently, although he could not answer. Somewhere above them, behind the quiet walls of the penthouse, Victoria stood alone beside her window, wondering whether one sentence, spoken from the heart, had just destroyed the only dream she had never been brave enough to chase. The next morning arrived with a quietness that neither Ethan Brooks nor Victoria Sterling had expected. Sunlight spilled across the wide windows of Sterling Heights, painting soft golden reflections over polished floors and peaceful hallways, yet the building somehow felt different after a single sentence had changed everything between 2 neighbors who had spent years pretending friendship was enough. Ethan stood in his kitchen flipping pancakes, while Lily sat at the table finishing her cereal, humming softly as she packed crayons into her backpack. The comforting rhythm of ordinary life usually settled his thoughts, but this morning every movement seemed to lead him back to the elevator. Lily noticed his distant expression almost immediately. "Daddy," she asked while pouring maple syrup on her pancakes, "did her dinner date get canceled already?" Ethan laughed gently. "No, sweetheart. It is still tonight." She tilted her head with the honest curiosity only an 8-year-old could possess. "Then why are you thinking about somebody else?" Ethan paused before smiling. "Am I really that easy to read?" Lily nodded proudly. "You always tell me that faces tell the truth before words do." Ethan reached across the table and brushed a loose strand of hair away from her forehead. "Maybe you inherited that gift from your mother." Across the building, Victoria stood inside her spacious penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city stretched endlessly beneath a pale, blue morning sky, while the first rush of commuters filled the streets below. Her breakfast remained untouched beside an open notebook that contained dozens of unfinished ideas for community improvements. Normally, she welcomed mornings because they brought purpose, decisions, and work that demanded complete attention. Today, every page remained blank. She could still hear Ethan quietly asking, "Did you mean what you said?" And she could still feel the weight of answering honestly for the first time in years. Her executive assistant called to remind her about a board meeting beginning in 30 minutes. Victoria calmly confirmed she would attend, closed the notebook, and slipped effortlessly back into the composed woman the business world recognized. Yet beneath the perfectly tailored navy suit and confident smile remained the same woman who had spent years silently noticing the ordinary moments no annual report could ever measure. She remembered the first week. Ethan moved into Sterling Heights, carrying more moving boxes than anyone should have managed alone. Before unpacking his own apartment, he had stopped to help an elderly resident whose groceries had fallen across the lobby floor. Nobody asked him to help. Nobody applauded him afterward. He simply smiled, wished the woman a pleasant afternoon, and continued upstairs without expecting recognition. A few weeks later, Victoria watched from the lobby cafe as Ethan patiently tied Lily's shoes before walking her to school, kneeling on one knee so she would never feel hurried. On another rainy afternoon, he held the front door open for a maintenance worker pushing heavy equipment through the entrance instead of rushing toward his own elevator. Small moments accumulated quietly, unnoticed by almost everyone except Victoria. She had built companies worth billions of dollars, negotiated contracts around the world, and met people who spoke confidently about success every day. Yet the man who impressed her most never spoke about himself at all. He simply lived with quiet dignity because that was the only way he knew how. As Ethan walked Lily toward the school bus that morning, he looked back once at the upper windows of Sterling Heights without fully understanding why. High above, hidden behind the reflection of morning sunlight on the glass, Victoria happened to be looking down at exactly the same moment, and neither of them realized that years before love had found its voice, it had first begun through the silent habit of simply paying attention. The afternoon passed with the steady rhythm of ordinary life. Yet ordinary moments had begun carrying extraordinary meaning for two people who still could not find the courage to speak honestly. Ethan Brooks spent the day reviewing architectural sketches for a neighborhood renovation project while answering calls from clients between loads of laundry and reminders from Lily's school. Nothing about his schedule appeared remarkable, but that was exactly what made him remarkable to anyone willing to notice. He never complained about long hours. He never measured success by the size of his paycheck. Every decision he made quietly revolved around one simple question. Would this give Lily a better tomorrow? As evening approached, Ethan walked across the courtyard of Sterling Heights carrying a small toolbox after noticing an elderly neighbor struggling with a loose bicycle basket. The older gentleman smiled apologetically. "I was going to wait for maintenance." Ethan knelt beside the bicycle and gently tightened the loose bolts. Sometimes 5 minutes today saves somebody trouble tomorrow. The repair took less than 10 minutes. Yet Ethan refused the folded $20 bill the grateful neighbor tried to hand him afterward. "Buy yourself a good cup of coffee instead," he said with an easy smile before continuing toward the lobby. High above, Victoria Sterling happened to witness the entire exchange from the quiet privacy of her office window. She had intended to review financial reports before tomorrow's investor presentation, but once again her attention drifted toward the courtyard below. She watched Ethan greet the concierge by name, paused to hold the front door for a young mother pushing a stroller, and waved cheerfully at the maintenance crew finishing their shift. There was never an audience when he chose kindness. That was why it mattered. Victoria had spent years surrounded by people who treated generosity like a performance. Press conferences celebrated charitable donations. Magazine covers praised public acts of leadership. Yet the man she could not stop thinking about performed his greatest acts when nobody important seemed to be watching. He never realized that someone was. Later that evening, Lily spread colored pencils across the dining table while Ethan prepared pasta for dinner. "Daddy," she asked, carefully choosing a blue crayon, "what makes somebody rich?" Ethan stirred the sauce before answering. "Some people count money. I think the richest people are the ones who have enough love to give away." Lily smiled thoughtfully and continued drawing. "Then you are rich." Ethan laughed softly. "Our bank account might disagree." Lily looked up with complete confidence. "Bank accounts do not know everything." Ethan smiled, touched by the innocent wisdom that children often carried without realizing it. Across the hallway of the same building, Victoria returned home later than usual after another successful board meeting. Awards lined the shelves of her penthouse. Framed newspaper articles celebrated record-breaking business achievements. Expensive artwork filled the walls with color and elegance. Yet as she removed her heels and stood barefoot beside the window, none of those accomplishments eased the quiet loneliness waiting inside the beautiful apartment. Her eyes drifted naturally toward the warmly lit windows of Ethan's home. She could not hear their conversation, but she could see Lily laughing while Ethan pretended to dance with a wooden spoon as dinner simmered on the stove. The simple scene brought an unexpected smile to her face. For a brief moment she imagined what it might feel like to belong inside that ordinary evening instead of watching it from a distance. She quickly dismissed the thought, reminding herself that dreams built on silence rarely came true. Still, before closing the curtains for the night, Victoria whispered words that no one else would ever hear. "If happiness has an address," she said quietly to the empty room, "it has never been the penthouse. It has always been 18B. Friday evening arrived with a cool breeze drifting through downtown Chicago, carrying the scent of fresh rain across quiet sidewalks as Ethan Brooks stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of the only navy blazer he still owned. It had been several years since he had prepared for something that was not a school event, a parent meeting, or a client presentation, and the unfamiliar feeling made him smile with equal parts hope and uncertainty. Lily sat cross-legged on the edge of his bed, studying him with the careful attention she usually reserved for complicated puzzle pieces. "You look nervous," she said. Ethan laughed softly while fastening the last button on his shirt. "I think that happens when somebody tries something new after a very long time." Lily nodded thoughtfully before hopping off the bed and straightening the slightly crooked lapel of his jacket with surprising seriousness. "Mom always said, confidence starts with little things." Ethan felt a quiet warmth settle over his heart. She was right about almost everything. Lily stepped back proudly to admire her work. "Now you look ready." Ethan smiled and kissed the top of her head before thanking Mrs. Henderson from the apartment next door for agreeing to babysit during the evening. As they walked toward the elevator, Lily suddenly tugged gently on his sleeve. "If you meet somebody nice," she whispered, "do not forget to tell them about me." Ethan knelt beside her until they were eye level. "There is nothing about you I could ever forget." The elevator doors opened, and for a brief second Ethan wondered if Victoria might be inside. The polished cabin stood empty. He quietly exhaled without realizing he had been holding his breath. Upstairs in the penthouse, Victoria Sterling stood near her living room window, holding a cup of tea that had long since grown cold. She had canceled 2 dinner invitations from business associates, claiming she needed an evening of rest before next week's meetings. The truth was much simpler and far more painful. She knew exactly where Ethan was going tonight. She had encouraged herself all afternoon to be happy for him, reminding herself that caring about someone also meant respecting their chance to find happiness, even if it led them away from her. Yet every encouraging thought dissolved the moment she watched him leave the building below. He looked thoughtful rather than excited, carrying himself with the same quiet dignity that had first captured her attention years earlier. She whispered a silent wish that the evening would bring him peace, even if it left her own heart a little emptier. Several miles away, Ethan arrived at a small neighborhood Italian restaurant where warm lights glowed through wide front windows. Rachel Parker was already waiting near the entrance with a welcoming smile that immediately eased some of his nervousness. She greeted him kindly, thanked him for coming, and together they found a quiet table near the window. Their conversation flowed naturally through stories about work, family, favorite books, and childhood memories. Rachel was thoughtful, genuine, and easy to talk to, yet every so often Ethan caught himself drifting into unexpected silence. His eyes would wander toward the reflection in the restaurant window, and without understanding why, another face quietly appeared in his thoughts. Rachel noticed the gentle pauses but never interrupted them. She simply watched the kind man across the table, searching for something he could not quite name. Back at Sterling Heights, Victoria finally turned away from the window and switched off the lights in her living room, believing darkness might quiet emotions that daylight refused to hide. Instead, the silence only grew louder, and for the first time in many years, she wondered whether letting someone go before they had ever truly belonged to her might be the hardest decision she would ever make. The dinner continued beneath the warm glow of hanging lights, while quiet piano music drifted through the restaurant, wrapping every table in a peaceful atmosphere that made conversation feel effortless. Rachel Parker listened with genuine interest as Ethan Brooks spoke about architecture, the joy of restoring old buildings, and the small traditions he shared with Lily every weekend. He described Saturday morning pancakes, library visits, and long walks along the lake whenever the weather allowed. There was no attempt to impress anyone. He simply spoke with the honesty of a man who had learned that the happiest memories rarely came from expensive moments. Rachel smiled often because his kindness felt natural rather than practiced. She understood why her friend had believed they might enjoy meeting each other. Yet as the evening unfolded, she also noticed something Ethan himself did not seem to recognize. Every time the conversation paused, his expression drifted somewhere far away. His eyes softened as though another face quietly occupied his thoughts. After their meals arrived, Rachel rested her hands around her glass of iced tea and studied him with gentle curiosity. "May I ask you something?" Ethan nodded. "Of course." She smiled kindly before choosing her words with care. "Are you here because you are ready to begin again, or because you think it's time to begin again?" Ethan looked down for a long moment. It was a simple question, yet it reached a place inside him that had remained hidden even from himself. "I believe those were the same thing," he admitted. Rachel shook her head gently. "Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're miles apart." Ethan slowly smiled, appreciating her honesty. "You are very good at reading people." Rachel laughed softly. "Only when they keep looking through the window instead of across the table." Ethan glanced toward the reflection in the glass and quietly realized she was right. He had spent the entire evening trying to understand why one unexpected conversation inside an elevator refused to leave his heart. Rachel followed his gaze before speaking again. "Whoever she is, she matters." Ethan did not answer immediately because he still could not explain what had happened. Victoria had never asked him for anything. She had never flirted with him or tried to change his life. She had simply been present, thoughtful, and quietly kind. Yet somehow her single confession had unsettled years of carefully guarded emotions. Finally, he looked back at Rachel with sincere gratitude. "You deserve someone whose whole heart arrives at dinner." Rachel smiled warmly. "So do you." There was no disappointment between them, only mutual respect. They finished dessert while talking comfortably about books and favorite neighborhoods in Chicago, and when Ethan walked at her car, they thanked each other for an honest evening. Rachel offered her hand before leaving. "I think we became friends instead of something else." Ethan shook her hand with genuine appreciation. "I think that is exactly right." As he made his way home beneath the city lights, the cool evening air felt strangely peaceful. For the first time all night, he stopped pretending he did not know where his thoughts had been. Meanwhile, back at Sterling Heights, Lily had fallen asleep on Mrs. Henderson's couch after finishing a drawing she insisted her father should see in the morning. Victoria quietly walked through the nearly empty lobby after returning from a late meeting she had accepted only to escape her own apartment. She expected another ordinary night until the front doors opened and Ethan stepped inside. Their eyes met across the marble floor, and neither of them spoke. Yet in the silence, both understood that the evening had answered a question neither had been brave enough to ask. The weekend arrived wrapped in gentle sunshine, and for the first time in many months Ethan Brooks woke without feeling the weight of unanswered questions pressing against his heart. The evening with Rachel had given him clarity instead of romance. And although he could not yet explain why Victoria Sterling occupied his thoughts so completely, he knew pretending otherwise would only make the truth harder to face. Lily skipped into the kitchen wearing bright yellow pajamas while carrying the drawing she had finished the night before. "I forgot to show you," she said excitedly, spreading the picture across the breakfast table. Ethan smiled as he looked at the colorful scene. 3 people stood beneath a large oak tree, holding hands while a small golden dog chased butterflies nearby. "This is beautiful," he said warmly. "Tell me about it." Lily pointed to the first figure. "That is you." Then she pointed to the smaller one. "That is me." Ethan noticed the third person had long brown hair and wore a navy blue dress. He looked at Lily with gentle curiosity. "And who is she?" Lily answered as though the question had the simplest answer in the world. "She's the lady who smiles with her eyes before she smiles with her mouth." Ethan blinked in surprise. "You mean Victoria?" Lily nodded happily. "She always remembers my piano recitals. She knows I like blueberry muffins. She asks about my spelling tests. People only remember little things when they love somebody." Ethan laughed softly, although the words settled deeply inside him. "Sweetheart, adults are sometimes more complicated than that." Lily shrugged while taking another bite of her pancake. "Maybe adults make simple things complicated." Her innocent observation lingered in Ethan's mind long after breakfast ended. Later that morning, they walked through the courtyard on their way to the neighborhood farmers market. Flower boxes overflowed with summer colors. Children played near the fountain, and neighbors greeted one another with familiar smiles. Victoria had planned to leave for a charity luncheon, but as she crossed the lobby, she noticed Lily sitting alone on a bench while Ethan helped an elderly resident carry several heavy grocery bags toward the entrance. Victoria walked over with her usual quiet warmth. "Good morning, Lily." The little girl beamed. "Good morning." Victoria admired the folded drawing resting beside her. "Working on another masterpiece." Lily nodded before suddenly asking, "Can I tell you a secret?" "Victoria smiled. Only if it is the kind of secret that is safe to share." Lily leaned closer and whispered with complete sincerity, "Daddy thinks he is hiding his feelings, but he is not very good at it." Victoria felt her heartbeat quicken. "Really?" Lily nodded again. "He looks at you the same way he looks at our apartment after a long trip. Like he is happy to be home." Before Victoria could respond, Ethan returned carrying the grocery bags he had just delivered. He thanked the elderly neighbor, turned toward the bench, and found Victoria and Lily laughing together. The simple sight filled him with an unexpected sense of peace. Victoria stood gracefully, wishing them both a wonderful day before continuing toward the waiting car outside. As she disappeared through the revolving doors, Lily slipped her small hand into Ethan's and looked up with quiet confidence. "Daddy," she said, "sometimes grown-ups wait so long to tell the truth that everybody becomes lonely first." Ethan looked toward the front entrance where Victoria had just vanished from sight, and for the first time he wondered whether the greatest misunderstanding in his life had not been what she felt for him, but what he had been afraid to feel for her. Monday morning began like any other, yet by noon the quiet balance Ethan Brooks had carefully rebuilt over the weekend had started to unravel. One of his architecture clients invited him to a planning meeting inside the executive offices of Sterling Development, explaining that the final renovation proposal required approval from the property owner before construction could begin. Ethan gathered his blueprints, greeted Lily with a promise to return before dinner, and made his way downtown without giving the company name a second thought. The receptionist welcomed him warmly before escorting him through a lobby lined with polished marble, modern artwork, and framed photographs celebrating decades of business achievements. As they approached the executive conference room, Ethan's attention drifted toward a large bronze plaque mounted beside the entrance. At the top, elegant lettering read, Sterling Development Group. Beneath it appeared a single name, Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer and Owner. Ethan stopped walking. For several silent seconds, he simply stared at the plaque, feeling as though every conversation he had ever shared with Victoria had suddenly taken on an entirely different meaning. The receptionist smiled politely. Miss Sterling will join you in just a few minutes. Ethan entered the conference room in complete disbelief. His eyes wandered across floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago, while questions crowded his thoughts faster than answers could arrive. She owned the company. She owned Sterling Heights. She had been his landlady all along, yet she had never mentioned it once. Every discounted lease renewal, every thoughtful conversation, every unexpected act of kindness suddenly appeared through a different lens. Had she truly cared about him? Or had she simply felt responsible for one more struggling tenant inside a building she owned? Moments later, the conference room door opened, and Victoria stepped inside wearing the same composed expression the business world expected from her. Their eyes met, and the warmth that usually filled her smile quietly faded as she realized Ethan had learned the truth. The other executives greeted her respectfully before beginning the meeting, unaware of the silent storm unfolding between the two people seated across the polished conference table. Victoria conducted the presentation with calm professionalism, asking thoughtful questions about the renovation project and complimenting Ethan's practical design ideas. Anyone watching would have believed they were simply meeting. For the first time, Ethan answered every question politely, but something inside him had changed. The woman he had begun to see as an equal now seemed impossibly distant. After the meeting ended and the executives filed out of the room, Victoria quietly asked, "Would you stay for a moment?" Ethan remained standing beside the table while the door closed behind the last employee. Neither of them spoke immediately. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "I wanted to tell you myself." Ethan managed a courteous smile that never reached his eyes. "Tell me what?" "That you own the building where Lily and I live? That every kind gesture came from the person collecting our rent?" Victoria took a slow breath. "It was never about rent." Ethan looked away toward the skyline. "Maybe not for you, but now I cannot stop wondering if every time you helped us, you were simply taking care of another tenant." The words were calm, yet they carried the quiet pain of a man whose greatest treasure had always been his dignity. Victoria stepped forward, hoping he would see the sincerity in her eyes, but Ethan gently picked up his portfolio instead. "I appreciate everything you have done," he said softly. "More than you know, but I think Lily and I should find another place to live." Victoria stood completely still as he walked toward the door. She had spent years protecting the truth because she feared her wealth would become a wall between them. And now that very wall had risen exactly as she had feared, built not from money itself, but from the quiet misunderstanding that the deepest acts of love had somehow been mistaken for charity. The drive back to Sterling Heights felt longer than usual, even though every traffic light turned green as if the city itself wanted Ethan Brooks to arrive home quickly. Instead of relief, each passing block only deepened the quiet ache inside him. He had always believed that respect grew strongest when people stood on equal ground, and now he feared that every warm memory he shared with Victoria Sterling had been shaped by a difference in power he had never seen. When he opened the apartment door, Lily immediately noticed the heaviness in his eyes. She set aside her homework and walked over without saying a word. "Daddy," she asked softly, "did something sad happen?" Ethan managed a gentle smile. "I found out something I should have known a long time ago." Lily listened carefully as he explained that Victoria was not simply a neighbor. She owned Sterling Heights, and the company responsible for many of the buildings across Chicago. Lily thought quietly for a moment before asking the one question Ethan had not considered. Did she become a different person today? Ethan looked at her in silence. No, he admitted. Then maybe only what you learned changed, Lily replied. Before Ethan could answer, a gentle knock echoed through the apartment. He opened the door, expecting Mrs. Henderson or a delivery driver, but Victoria stood there alone, dressed not in her usual business attire, but in a simple cream-colored sweater and dark slacks, looking less like a celebrated executive and more like the woman who had remembered Lily's piano recitals and favorite muffins. May I come in for a few minutes? She asked quietly. Ethan hesitated before stepping aside. Victoria thanked him and entered, kneeling briefly to greet Lily before asking if she might have a private conversation with Ethan. Lily smiled knowingly and disappeared into her bedroom with her coloring books. For several moments, neither adult spoke. The familiar apartment, usually filled with easy conversation, now held only the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. Finally, Victoria looked directly at Ethan. You believe I helped you because I own the building, she said. Ethan answered honestly. I did not know what to believe anymore. Victoria nodded slowly. Then let me tell you the truth I should have told years ago. She folded her hands together, not as a chief executive addressing an employee, but as a woman placing her heart where it could finally be seen. The first time I noticed you was before I knew your name. You were carrying boxes into the building, while Lily carried a stuffed rabbit almost as big as she was. An elderly resident dropped her groceries, and before you unlocked your own apartment, you stopped to help her. You never looked around to see who noticed. That was the moment I understood the kind of man you were. Ethan remained silent. Victoria continued gently. I learned your apartment number weeks later. I learned you were raising Lily alone months later. I never lowered your rent. I never changed your lease. I never gave you special treatment because I respected your dignity too much to do that. Every kindness I offered was the same kindness I hope someone would show the people I love. The only difference was that I loved you before I admitted it to myself. Ethan looked in her eyes and found no trace of pity, no hint of obligation, only quiet sincerity. Victoria took one careful breath before speaking the words she had hidden for years. I never wanted you to feel rescued. I wanted you to feel seen. There is a difference, and I am deeply sorry if my silence made those two things look the same. Ethan lowered his eyes as every memory began rearranging itself into a new truth. The thoughtful conversations, the genuine concern for Lily, the countless ordinary moments had never been acts of charity. They had been the patient language of a woman whose greatest fear was that her success would prevent the only man she truly admired from believing her heart. The apartment remained quiet long after Victoria Sterling finished speaking, yet the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt honest. Ethan Brooks looked around the familiar living room where so many ordinary evenings had unfolded, and for the first time he realized that every important moment in his life had been built not through grand achievements, but through quiet choices. He thought about the elevator, the unexpected confession, the countless mornings Victoria had remembered Lily's small victories, and the way she had always treated him with unwavering respect. None of those memories carried the weight of charity anymore. They carried the unmistakable warmth of love, patiently waiting for the right moment to be understood. Ethan finally lifted his eyes and met hers. I spent my whole life trying to make sure nobody ever felt sorry for me, he said softly. After my wife passed away, I promised myself that Lily would grow up seeing a father who stood on his own feet. When I learned who you were, I believed everything between us had changed. Victoria gently shook her head. Nothing changed except the information you had. I have always seen the same man. Ethan smiled, a quiet smile that reached his eyes for the first time in days. Then I owe you an apology. I judged your heart before I listened to it. Victoria answered with equal warmth. And I owe you one for hiding something that mattered. I thought protecting you from the truth would make life simpler. Instead, it made trust more difficult. At that moment, Lily quietly stepped out of her bedroom, holding the drawing she had carried all weekend. She walked between them with complete confidence and placed the picture on the coffee table. I think it is finished now, she announced. Ethan and Victoria looked down together. The three figures beneath the great oak tree were still there. But now Lily had added a small white house in the background with bright windows glowing beneath a peaceful evening sky. Above the front door, she had carefully written one simple word in colorful letters. Home. Victoria felt tears gather in her eyes, but this time they came with hope instead of sorrow. Lily looked from one adult to the other and smiled. A home is where people choose each other every day. Ethan slowly reached for Victoria's hand. There was no audience waiting to applaud them, no dramatic celebration, and no perfect ending borrowed from a fairy tale. There was only an honest beginning built upon respect freely given and trust finally restored. Victoria gently squeezed his hand, and for the first time, neither wealth nor status stood between them. They were simply two people who had spent too long believing that love required perfect timing when all it had ever needed was honest courage. In the weeks that followed, life at Sterling Heights settled into a peaceful rhythm that felt wonderfully ordinary. Ethan continued designing buildings that strengthened neighborhoods. Victoria continued leading her company with quiet integrity while creating opportunities for families throughout the city. Rachel remained a kind friend, happy to see Ethan discover the place where his heart truly belonged. Mrs. Henderson often joked that the happiest sound in the building was Lily laughing somewhere down the hallway. On warm Saturday mornings, the three of them walked together to the neighborhood bakery before visiting the farmer's market, looking less like people trying to build a family and more like one that had quietly existed all along. Sometimes the greatest miracles never arrive with applause or celebration. Sometimes they begin with a single honest sentence, survive seasons of misunderstanding, and finally find their way home through quiet dignity, patient grace, and the courage to believe that second chances are not gifts reserved for extraordinary people. They are waiting every day for ordinary hearts willing to tell the truth.